Every year, at the beginning of the cultural season, one distinguished author gives us a small lecture, an essay reflecting on the place of their art in today's society. These lectures are published in Belgian newspapers and later on also, of course, on our website. They are discussed during events such as this and always inspire us when we develop public events with other writers. Last year, the Chinese author Yu Hua explained to us what it is like as a Chinese to be read far outside his own cultural context, underlining the importance of good translators, publishers, and curious and open-minded readers. The person to whom we have assigned this honorable task for 2018 is none other than the great British-Hungarian author David Szalay, who is now enjoying a 4-week stay as Passa Porta's writer-in-residence in Brussels. David is the author of several radio dramas for the BBC and of 3 novels, London and the Southeast, Innocence and Spring. His international breakthrough came in 2016 when his masterpiece All That Man Is, a novel, or I would rather say a collection of 9 intertwined stories, was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. All That Man Is now also translated in more than 20 languages. In Dutch it is called Wat een man is, published by Nijg en van Ditmer, and in French, published this year, Ce qu'est l'homme, published by Albin Michel. David's work is, of course, available here all the time, and especially tonight. And David will be, I hope, glad to sign your copy at the end of the evening. For this year's Passa Porta lecture, we asked David to develop his ideas on the relation between the writer and the reader. This is a theme that Passa Porta is now exploring in many different ways since the 3rd edition of our International Writers Seminar earlier this year in March. On that occasion, 5 authors from different countries have discussed the existence of their ideal readers, as well as their own reading habits as writers, and their ability to read or their impossibility to read their own work. You can still find all these essays and a report on the seminar in the magazine section on of our brand new website. It's still passaporta.be, but since a couple of weeks it's a brand new layout. The theme of the reader will also be at the heart of the next edition of the Passa Porta Festival, which will take place next year from 28 till 31 March. So now it's time for me to go and to give the floor to David, who will be interviewed by the great cultural journalist and radio presenter Nicky Aerts. I wish you all a very truly inspiring evening. Thank you.
So David, I heard you're in the middle of your stay, right? In the middle, 2 weeks?
Exactly in the middle. I've been here 2 weeks out of 4.
2 weeks in Brussels. So how are you?
I'm fine. It feels like I've never lived anywhere else, you know.
Seriously?
Yes, I mean, I can't remember it. Partly because when I arrived 2 weeks ago, it was still summer. It was still 30 degrees. And so it feels like I've been here since July or something.
Yeah. I can see what you mean. We have 4 seasons in one day in
yes,
Brussels.
Yeah, yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday. This isn't your first time in Brussels, right?
Not at all. I lived here, actually, for a couple of years, a long time ago, in 2003 and 4. I lived in Brussels.
Yeah, so what were you doing here? What brought you to Brussels?
At that time?
Yeah.
I was escaping from London.
I know why you're here now.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I'm not sure. I was escaping from London then, was the main thing, I guess. I wanted to get out of London. I did a job in London that I didn't like. And I wanted to sort of get away from it, get out and make some sort of new start. And it was actually in Brussels in 2004 that I started writing the book, which was published as London in the Southeast. So it's interesting.
So you started writing in Brussels?
Well, I started writing novels in Brussels.
Yeah, okay.
I'd written some radio plays already before that. But yeah, I mean, the first novel that I wrote, I started writing it in Brussels. So it would always have...
And how come, do you know, that you started writing in Brussels?
I think it was just, I mean, it was, I had time. I was just
boredom.
I was just boredom, nothing else to do. I needed money.
That's a good reason.
Yeah, just all the usual reasons. But mainly, there was also an aspect, I guess, that that book is very much about London. It's about working in London. It's about the job that I had been doing in London for some years before that in telephone sales. And so there was an aspect in which getting away from that, I left the job only shortly before I left London. So it was like I suddenly completely moved away from that life. And it opened up a perspective on that life, which meant that in a funny way, I was able to laugh at it then from that distance in a way that I wasn't when I was still sort of in it. And that laughing at it was what made the book possible as a book then. It was about the key to the book was being able to laugh about it, being able to make a comedy out of what had been in many ways a very unpleasant experience and a very unsatisfactory way of life.
Yeah.
So
where did you live at the time? In
Brussels. I lived down in Uccle. So yes, it was far from the centre.
Part of town,
absolutely, very sleepy and not much happening.
I would start writing when I...
Yeah, oh no, exactly.
So, but now you're staying
right
smack dab in the heart of Brussels.
Yeah.
You said yes to this residency. Why? Because you left Brussels.
Partly out of nostalgia. I mean, really. I mean, that was very much part of the reason. I mean, there have been other... I mean, generally speaking, I'm not a kind of residency junkie. I mean, some writers never seem to not be doing a residency. I have, this sounds boastful, but I have turned down other residencies because I sort of don't see the point really of them. But the Brussels thing, yes, it was partly just the nostalgia. I just thought, wouldn't it be extraordinary to come back and live, even for a few weeks, in Brussels again and kind of revisit that episode of my life, which is obviously now so long ago that it's rather faded away. So it is amazing to come back and be here again. And the city's, of course, changed a lot, but not that much, I mean, it's still the same in most ways, really. The trams are much nicer. You've got new trams.
They're cleaner.
Cleaner, yes. Yeah.
Leather seating.
Those very nice brown fake leather seats.
Yeah.
I like those.
So what you left Brussels after 2 years or so?
About
when
2
you
years,
2003.
Yeah.
You're here now for 2 weeks. City has changed. You've been writing all the time, I hope.
Yeah.
Have you been walking around a lot? Is it
I have,
where you,
I'm afraid. I've spent quite a lot of time walking around.
So that's where you get your inspiration.
Well, that's where, I mean, let's say that, okay. I mean, it's good for thinking. It's not, I mean, inspiration's perhaps the wrong word, or it sounds too romantic. It's more just a question of you walk along the street and if you just sit in a chair trying to think of things, obviously nothing happens. I mean, it's like trying to make yourself fall asleep. It's just not really possible. But if you're walking along a street and constantly being distracted and your thoughts are just wandering generally, then, I mean, this is my experience, then good ideas tend to fall on you unexpectedly. And
are you the kind of person who writes things down immediately, like takes notes, or is it just like... I
don't like to do that. I mean, I like to think that if something's really good, I'm not going to forget it, but sometimes, occasionally, but I never have a pen and paper, so I then need to somehow put it into a blank text message on my phone or something, but sometimes I do that. Yeah.
So, what are you writing on at this very moment?
Well, now, I mean, it was a very good time. It's a very good time to do this 4-week break, this 4-week sort of holiday from the general day-to-day pressures of my life, because I've just finished one book, which will be published in in the UK in December called Turbulence, and I finished it literally a few weeks ago, the final sort of edit. With the page proofs. I mean, it's they're going to print it sort of any day now.
It's a novel, right?
Well, kind of. No, it was actually originated as the BBC Radio Commission. It's 12 short stories which were written for the radio, and they're going to be broadcast very soon. I mean, one a week for 12 weeks, starting in a couple of weeks. And yeah, so it's 12 short stories. I mean, they're definitely stories. They're not dramas. They'll be read on the radio, each by just one actor, and they're appearing in book form. They'll be published in book form in December, and that's called Turbulence. And I've been working on it since the beginning of the year or the end of last year. But I had been in the middle of doing something else, actually, writing a novel, when that commission arrived. So I broke off that last November-ish, having written about 35,000 words or so. And then I hadn't looked at that material for almost a year. So it was really a question, my aim when I came here was, first of all, to read that material, and I was so scared of reading it that I put it off for several days. I spent several days just wandering around Brussels before I could bring myself to look at it, because obviously the fear was this is, could be anything. I mean, it could just be utter whatever.
How was it?
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I'm saving it. For the last 2 weeks, I've been kind of performing emergency surgery. I think it's going to pull through.
Yeah, so this was very welcoming, because you said before that you're not really a fan of doing these residency things.
No, but this one was very well timed, because I felt I had a very specific, self-contained job to look through this material, work out whether it's viable, work out whether it's the book that I now want to write, and then sort of start doing that.
Can you tell us a bit more about it, or that's like?
I could. I mean,
no, let's not do that.
I mean,
no. Drop it. I didn't ask you. The book "All That Man Is" actually a mosaic, I would call it. It's 9 different stories that are in all over Europe. The European cities are the backdrop for the stories.
Yes.
For the European man.
The protagonist of each story is male. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. The European. Is there such a thing as a European male?
Well, I mean, no. I mean, that wasn't really. Actually, it wasn't really my intent. You see, a lot of people have taken this book as being some picture of specifically European men. And,
let me just check whether did someone read it? Okay, good.
And I never really intended it as... I mean, I don't think that these European men are fundamentally different from men from other continents, I guess is what I'm saying. So I'm always slightly... When people ask, these European men in this book, as if men from America or Asia are sort of a completely different thing. No, I mean, that's not my opinion. That's not how I see it. I said it in Europe because Europe's where I'm from. Europe's where I know. And apart from one aspect of the book is it's a book to some extent about masculinity, but I also wanted to write a book about contemporary Europe, almost so sort of separately from that. So part of the structure of the book and the way it works with traveling around Europe was more to do with just writing about Europe as Europe rather than... So
it's about Europe, it's about masculinity, it's about European cities, and you describe them in very great detail, so you must have been there. Although I know that there's the internet, and you don't have to travel, you don't have to go somewhere to be able to describe it or have the feeling that you're there, but did you go there, David?
A couple of the places I haven't been to, actually. A couple of the places you say Google Street View, that kind of thing.
Did you go to Berlin?
Yes, I've been to Berlin. Yeah, I've been to Berlin.
Prague?
I've been to Prague, yeah. I mean, we could go through all the cities. Should I just tell you which city I haven't been to?
Yes, please.
I've never been to Copenhagen.
Okay.
And part of the book is set there. So that was a cheat. I felt bad about that, because the whole principle of the book, I chose places that I knew, but then I ran out, of course. I mean, I haven't been to that many places.
And you still had this one mail
and
that
I
you had to
this one story that needed to be, And obviously, I mean, there was always a temptation just to make the character British.
It starts with two
It
boys
does, and there are more
from
British
Great
characters
Britain,
than other nationalities in the book. But I mean, I tried to dial down the Britishness as much as possible because I did want to write about Europe as a whole. So yes, I was forced to make up Copenhagen.
What was the specific thing you wanted to write about Europe? I mean, what is it? What's the story you want to tell?
Well,
What's
I
the message you
didn't want to
across?
tell a story or say a message. What I wanted to do was just describe Europe as I see it, or as I saw it in 2013, 14, 15 when I was writing the book. I mean, obviously since then there have been developments, but it struck me then that I'd never read a novel, a fiction, a book, that really reflected the nature of contemporary Europe in that way, that really reflected the fluidity, I mean, my own, and of course it originates in my own experience to some extent. I mean, I had moved to Hungary. I moved to Hungary some years ago, and I wrote this book.
That's where your roots are.
My father's from Hungary, and then I wrote this book in Hungary when I was living there. My cousin from Hungary at the same time moved to London. My sister, as it happened, moved to Italy, and my grandfather, actually, who was English, he moved to France. So I mean, there was within my own family there was an extraordinary amount of kind of moving around Europe going on, and that's not so strange now. I mean, that happens on a very large scale. I mean, you know, there are great kind of tidal movements of people moving from Eastern Europe to Western Europe for higher wages, from people moving to Northern Europe, from Northern Europe to Southern Europe to retire in the sun, like Americans go to Florida. You know, I mean, that happens here now too. So these enormous movements, to say nothing of people just traveling around on business trips and, you know, holidays, you know, that had become a huge phenomenon, and it has kind of crept up on us. I felt that it hadn't really. No one had really noticed it, almost, it seems. I mean, since then, of course, it's been noticed politically big time.
Yeah, hopefully it will stay a Europe without borders.
I hope so.
Never know where it goes.
I hope so. I think so. I mean, in a way, I think obviously Britain's a special case, and Britain's going to not be within that fluid Europe quite so much as it. I mean, inevitably it will be less. But the rest of the European Union, I think it's now become too. I don't know. Who knows? We could talk about this all evening. Let's not do that.
Let's do that. Not do that now. Your protagonists in this book are male, as we already said, different ages. No?
Yeah, that's obviously important.
And they all seem to be looking for something. What are they looking for?
Well, I mean, as you say, this for me is in a way the most important single thing about the book. The 9 stories have 9 male protagonists, each older than the last one by 5 to 10 years. So it progresses. I mean, this for me, when I was writing the book, was like the main point. It progresses from the first story is about a 17-year-old, and the final story is about a guy in his 70s.
And you're in the middle.
I wrote the book from this perspective in the middle, yeah. Yes, absolutely. There is this sense that they're all looking for something. Some of them get what they think they want, but by the time they get it, they very often realize that they actually by now want something else. It's a kind of desire as a moving target, as it were, as part of what I was trying to get at. I mean, kind of.
Mm-hmm. The book's been translated in more than 20 languages, I think, or
roughly 20, I think. Yeah.
As many countries as you visited.
Yeah.
But how are the reactions? Is there any difference in like people in Hungary who read your book? The reactions in Belgium to the translation?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there?
I'm not as far as I can tell, but then I don't sort of carefully monitor all the reviews and everything. I don't.
But it was well perceived because I mean, there's all these translations.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, it seems like it. I think there's different, perhaps in different countries, a slightly different emphasis. I mean, I've noticed. Yes, I suppose I have noticed in the kinds of questions that journalists have asked me from different countries.
You get different questions from...
Not in any sort of detailed way, but I guess continental journalists focused more than British journalists, for sure, on the European aspect of the book, actually. Continental journalists would ask far more questions along the lines of, is this book a really gloomy portrait of contemporary Europe? What do you think of contemporary Europe? Those kind of questions. Whereas in Britain, that was a bit of that, but not so much. No, that I did notice, yeah.
And who should read the book? I mean, if you intend the book, I mean, this is part of the already. I'm trying to push you towards the essay that you've been commissioned to write. When you wrote this book, did you think like, oh, I want this book to be read by so and so? This kind of.
No, I didn't. Not at all. I mean, no. I mean, I don't think of. I didn't have a target audience in mind or anything like that. Or I didn't, and I still don't. I definitely don't think it's a book for men. I mean, it slightly annoys me when people pigeonhole it as a book that's only
for men. Or it's about men.
It's certainly more about men than it is about women.
But it's also about women.
But it's also about women. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not like there are no female characters. It's not like
and
women
they play
have
an important role.
They play an important role. Thank you. Exactly. So yes, I'm very resistant to the idea that this is somehow a book for men or whatever. Although there have been a lot of my male friends who do read normally, like they generally read novels, have said that they have male friends who I don't know who don't normally read novels, but who liked this one.
Okay.
Whatever that means.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a good thing, whatever it means.
I think it is a good thing. How much time do you yourself leave between finishing a book and rereading it because you want it to be perfect, and then have it published, and then when can you read it back, your own book?
Yeah, that's very tricky. That is right, yes. That was right when Pete was talking in the introduction about that discussion of writers reading their own work. I was interested to know what they'd said, because that, yeah. I mean, for instance, just a couple of days ago, I got the absolutely final page proofs of this book that's going to be published in December, yeah. Turbulence. And I was sort of almost scared of looking at them. I was supposed to just check that all the changes that I'd wanted from the last round had been incorporated correctly. But that was it. They weren't soliciting further changes. I mean, they just wanted me to check that the last lot were properly done. And I was scared to look at it because I kind of thought, I'm going to want to change things again. It will be so painful to read something that I want to change and then not be able to change it. And yeah, that can be. I can find that very, very sort of tormenting almost. And so there's this feeling, yeah, that there comes a point when the book is just frozen. You're sort of,
yeah.
It's so malleable. You change it, and for years you're changing it, and then suddenly it's like that forever, and you can never change it again. And then for a while, that can be sort of slightly difficult in that if you then look at it and see something you want to change, you know you can't. But then years later, like with London and the South East, the book that I started writing in Brussels in 2004, by now I'm such a different person from the person who wrote that book that it's almost like somebody else's book now.
Seriously?
So looking at that book now, I don't sort of think, oh, I wish I could change. I sometimes think, well, the writer this would have been better, or that would have been better. But it's like it's not like it's me anymore. It's like it's.
It's funny.
At some
you would
point,
say that the writer
occurred.
should have done this and this.
Well, that's almost how it feels with a book that he wrote, for instance, 10 years ago. I mean, yeah, because you've changed as a person, and you just, and also I guess you just get more tolerant. You know, you're less precious about the book as time goes on as well. Generally,
this one dates back to 2016, I guess.
It was published in spring 2000, 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
Can you read it now without thinking
of
changing stuff?
I don't. It's not like I sit around reading my own books, really, anyway. But, I mean, occasionally. I mean, I have to sometimes read from it to an audience, for instance, and I quite enjoy that. I'm at peace with that one. I think. Yeah.
What other writers do you read? If you don't spend your time reading your own books, there's a...
Well, I'm at the moment I'm reading Krasznahorkai, the Hungarian writer. Do you know?
In Hungarian?
No, my Hungarian isn't good enough. I'm reading in English, unfortunately. Satan Tango.
Oh.
Do you know it?
No, I haven't read it.
It's very good. It's the first book of his that I've read, actually, but it's about 70 pages in.
Good read.
It's great. It's quite... Anyway, yes, it's good.
Okay, I think it's about time that you move
Should I do that now?
And maybe, read the essay that you...
Yes. Today I'm not going to read from one of my books. I'm going to read this.
We're all ears.
So, I was asked to consider the question, should writers think of their readers when they're writing? To me, the answer to that question seems obvious. Of course they should. I see the relationship between reader and writer as that of two people playing a sort of game. In writing fiction, the writer is playing a sort of game with the reader. And that game has only one rule. The writer must not bore the reader. The writer must interest the reader and keep them interested. Of course, there are many different ways of being interesting, and what is interesting to one person won't necessarily be interesting to another. In the case of popular fiction, though, the point about interest seems pretty obvious. Nobody, I think, would disagree that popular fiction must stand or fall solely on its ability to hold the reader's interest. Successful popular fiction is very good at this. A few years ago, I stayed up until 2 o'clock in the morning, not something I normally do, to finish Agatha Christie's Murder in Mesopotamia. I don't think I've ever stayed up until 2 in the morning to finish a novel by, for example, Virginia Woolf, much as I like and enjoy her work. She is compelling in a different way. And the fact that we call Murder in Mesopotamia a novel, and also call To the Lighthouse a novel, masks the very great difference in the nature of the interest they offer. It also, of course, points to a fundamental similarity. The interest offered by Murder in Mesopotamia is straightforwardly the interest of not knowing what's going to happen, and to a lesser extent, not knowing how it's going to happen. What makes Agatha Christie so good is that she sees this so clearly and doesn't try to do anything else. Her books are short, lean, and do not waste any more time on extraneous elements, setting, character, anything that might be called texture, than is absolutely necessary to support the rudimentary illusion required by the suspense. I don't really remember anything about Murder in Mesopotamia, except that I couldn't stop reading it until I found out who had killed whatever her name was. I wanted to see how the book would answer the question that it raised. Now, To the Lighthouse might raise very different sorts of questions, but fundamentally the way it operates is actually quite similar. Agatha Christie asks very simple questions, or rather one very simple question: who did the murder? And she's very skillful at making the reader want to know the answer to that question. But a novel like To the Lighthouse also is about questions and answers. It also operates by raising questions to which the reader wants to know the answer. The questions are very different. They're questions about the nature of perception. They're questions about the nature of character. They're questions about the nature of time. But they still have to be presented in ways that make the reader want to know the answers to them, and some kind of answer has to be supplied for the experience to be a satisfying one. In both cases, the relationship between question and answer sets up certain expectations in the reader, and the writer's deft management of those expectations is what allows the book to hold our interest over hundreds of pages. And whether it is able to do that or not is finally the only criterion for judging its success. So the lighthouse also must stand or fall solely on its ability to hold the reader's interest. To dispute that, it seems to me, is to suggest that what we call serious literature is allowed to be boring. In fact, just to call it serious literature almost amounts to giving it permission to be boring. The trouble is that the moment something is allowed to be boring, the moment people almost expect it to be boring, at least part of the time, it is dead as a cultural form. It has lost touch with the reason it exists in the first place. It is merely a dutiful ritual in which a declining number of mostly elderly people take an interest until it is entirely forgotten. Opera, for instance, is deep into this process of dying. And some people I know think that literature is too. I'm more optimistic, so I'm going to say no. Literature is not allowed to be boring. Its only duty is to be interesting. Nothing else matters. Ultimately, the reason for this is very simple. In other kinds of writing, in other kinds of discourse, the text is, as it were, a means to an end, a way of communicating specific information. What distinguishes literature is that the text is an end in itself, whose existence can only be justified by its inherent interest. Does that sound reductive? Writing is often talked about in grander terms. It is regarded as socially or spiritually important. It is thought of as a sort of quasi-scientific or philosophical investigation into the nature of things. These kind of thoughts can all too easily turn into excuses for neglecting the primary task of being interesting. Decadence and decline begin there. It is difficult, I think, for any art form to survive too much prestige. Also threatening is the idea that something, literature for example, might be good for you, or the means to some other end. As when writing is viewed as having a kind of therapeutic value for the writer themselves, when it is seen as a matter of personal development, or as a sort of spiritual quest. Dig deep inside, battle self-doubt, and become the person you know you can be, was how an article in a newspaper promoting a well-known school of creative writing recently characterized the writing process. Know Thyself was the title of the article. Writing, it went on, is about claiming ownership of yourself in order to become the person you know you can be. It's about acknowledging to yourself that writing is not just a hobby, but a profound force in your life, one that will help you achieve a deep sense of self-expression. A novel is making your mark on the world. It is your cri de coeur. I don't think that. I think writing a novel is playing a game with the reader. Writing is rhetoric, not religion. And all writers are readers before they are writers. This is where the idea of the game begins, in childhood. That is where the rules of the game are learned. That is when the pleasure principle is established. The reading child feels like a co-conspirator in the creation of an imaginative experience and is deliciously aware of the fact that he is being manipulated, of the fact that he is playing a sort of game. For me, those feelings are still the deepest pleasure that reading can afford, and therefore the greatest source of pleasure that writing offers too, since reading and writing are not separate, but entirely conjoined activities. Things like self-expression don't really come into the picture at that point. And yet later in life, we can't easily shake the feeling that self-expression is somehow important. This has to do, I think, with the idea of truth. We equate self-expression with truth, and truth is what we want. Truth is what interests us. How many of us, I wonder, have illicitly read the private diary of someone we know? the experience can certainly be compelling. We might stumble on the thing by accident and be unable to resist, taking what we promise ourselves will be just a quick peek, and then find that half an hour later we've read dozens of pages and are almost unable to stop. There is a kind of thrill in having that sort of access to someone's unmediated thoughts. The indiscretions we find make us feel giddy. We feel that we are somehow getting at the essence of the person whose diary we are reading. We feel that we are getting closer to the truth of them. And isn't this what we feel fiction should be trying to do? To reach some sense of human truth, which makes flippant talk of playing games seem silly. It undoubtedly is one of the fascinations of reading fiction, more or less any fiction, that we are given that sort of access to the private thoughts of other people, even if they're only fictional characters. We are permitted to look behind the normally impenetrable surface that other people present to the world and see what they're really thinking and feeling. We are permitted, in other words, to experience them as they experience themselves. And in doing so, we hope to find some sort of truth, the sort of truth to be found, we would like to think, in the minute examination of human character. This has come to be seen as the primary mission of what we think of as serious fiction. So it's not surprising that one of the main aims of most fiction writers is to make the characters in their books seem as plausible and as persuasive as possible, to make them seem as much as possible like real people. Because only by seeming like real people can they offer the possibility of yielding some sort of truth. From the 18th century down to today, successive techniques have been used for creating characters who seem real, presenting them through their letters, for example, or their stream of consciousness. When new and unfamiliar to the reader, these techniques can be strikingly successful. The characters surge into life with the force and pungency of lived reality. In time, however, the techniques become familiar and predictable, like stratagems in a game, so that the characters start to seem not quite like real people anymore, and merely like characters in a novel, the products of an illusion. And of course, no matter how real the characters seem, it always is an illusion. This knowledge should bother us in some way, that the fact of its being an illusion should seem problematic to us is an indicator of our difficulty with seeing literature as simply rhetoric and not as religion. We want to feel that we have grasped some actual truth. And one way of dealing with this problem is to write books that appear to say, actually, this isn't an illusion. This is true. The characters and events in this book are real. In other words, to blur the line between fiction and reality to the point where the reader simply has no idea what is real and what isn't. Using the names of real people, especially the author, is one obvious way to do this. A technique employed from the teasingly titled The Sexual Life of Catherine M. by Catherine Millet to The End of Eddie by Edouard Louis. Another part of this approach is to mimic the linguistic texture of something like a personal diary. And for this, the key thing is to create the impression that the writer was specifically not thinking of the reader when they were putting the words down on paper or typing them into a laptop. The lack of finish, of polish, even of coherence, is supposed to convey the actual reality of what is being said. And of course it does indeed often achieve that. It gives us the feeling that we are reading something unmediated. And who knows? Perhaps we are reading something unmediated. Our inability to be sure is precisely what achieves the desired end of making what we're reading seem real. Seem real. That's the important thing. Because to label a piece of writing fiction, to describe it as a novel, is to assert one thing and one thing only. That the crucial thing is not that what is described is true, but that it seems true. And so by a process that is almost paradoxical, the writer who seeks to persuade the reader that he is not thinking of them at all, that he is entirely indifferent to them, that he is actually unaware of their presence, in fact has the reader in front of his eyes the entire time, because it is precisely for that reader that he is striving to create the sense of reality, and therefore the interest, that his apparent indifference so successfully fosters. His indifference is itself a kind of illusion, a novel move in an endless game. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, David. There's a lot of interesting things you said. I tried to take some notes, but I mean, unreadable, not for publication. But I'd like to open the floor to the readers,
Sure.
because they're real, they're here, the readers. Is there anyone who would like to ask David something about the essay, something that stuck? Yes.
Hi, David. Really interesting lecture. So we work in literary studies, and I imagine that you, as a writer, also think about, you obviously think about how to write. You talked about how the main interest of a novel, for instance, is to keep things interesting, right? Because it's all an illusion, it's all a game. But people like us who have spent years studying literature, people that, like you, have been spending a lot of time writing literature, do you think it's more difficult to keep those people interested?
We can perfectly understand what you're saying. Thank you.
I mean, that's a very good point. I mean, it's a continuous, it's a kind of, it's almost like an arms race, I would say. Because, I mean, you can do anything at all in order to be interesting, to interest the reader. I really think that the only meaningful distinction is between what is interesting and what isn't. And obviously you can't interest everybody all the time. I mean, that goes without saying. You're trying to interest a particular part of the reading public, if I can put it in that such a pompous way. But or in a way, actually there's another way of looking at it, which is that you're trying to interest yourself in a way as well, as the writer. The writer, in terms of kind of anticipating what would interest the reader, the writer can only really, I mean, certainly the more sophisticated the game becomes, the writer is then more and more having to think in terms of what would interest them. But I would still see it as the principle of the game still applies. And really, when I'm writing, I mean, this is obviously now just talking personally. When I'm writing, it is I very much have this sense of playing a game. That implies something kind of trivial and unimportant, but it's not necessarily the case at all. It's just it's that aspect of it. How can I put this? It's that aspect of it which makes literature literature, and not something else. Not another form of writing, for instance. Not philosophy or religion or something from the kind of non-fiction part of the bookshop.
But there are rules, right? The first rule being not be boring.
Well, that's the only rule.
That's the
I'm saying that's
rule.
the only rule. There are no other rules.
Good.
I mean, I really did try and think, what rule could I insist on? What rule could I be satisfied with myself, with insisting on, where I can really think of no exceptions, and really it is a rule in that sense, and that's it.
Yeah.
If you're boring, I mean, if you can start to say, if you interest, how many people do you have to interest to be considered interesting? I mean, whatever. You could get into theological discussions about that. But clearly, if you can appeal to some kind of readership and interest them, no matter how small that is, then you've achieved some kind of success. But I mean, partly it's just a way also of, as a writer, of focusing on what I think is important in terms of the craft of writing and in terms of writing successful novels. I mean, that's certainly the advice that, I mean, I don't really teach creative writing on a systematic way at all.
But you do it.
I mean, I have done it. I've done it once or twice on a sort of, I have done it. And that would be the sort of bottom line advice I would give. Think about it as a game, where your role in the game is to interest the reader. But then the readers. I mean, one of them, it's a continuously shifting thing, because you're playing with the reader's expectation. The expectation is the key idea, I think. A book is always, from the first sentence, from the first word, practically, a book is creating expectations for the reader. And if the reader's expectations are continually, if what the reader expects to happen is always what happens, then that's boring, I guess. That's, in a way, if you're looking for a definition of what's boring, it's that. The reader always has to be somehow surprised. And Agatha Christie's a good example, because it's so obvious and simple in her case. It really is like a little machine operating. But she does it so brilliantly that you can read, 30 of them, and she's still able to successfully send you the wrong way. Somehow, you think you know all her tricks, you think you know exactly how she works, but she can still somehow get your expectations to go one way and then take them the other way.
And I have to trace it back and see what you missed. Like,
and then and then you always expect her to fail, and she never fails. I mean, it's quite incredible.
Any other questions?
I was going to ask you, how important for you is humour? Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Thank you. How important, I'll say it again then, how important for you is humour in your books? Because London in the South East is like kind of almost a comic novel.
Yeah.
And the one on the table there, which is great, by the way. I mean, there were parts of that are really kind of laugh out loud funny. I'm thinking particularly of the young man's sentimental education, when he goes does he go from Lille to
Cyprus?
To Cyprus.
Yes,
Oh,
and that's just
that's
very,
hilarious.
very, very funny. There's other bits that, you're not aiming for laughs, but is it part of my question is it part of the golden rule not to be dull and not to be boring to interest the reader? Is part of that, is it being funny as well? Because
that's one way of doing it.
Is it possible to do it without humour?
Yeah, sure it is. Of course it is. But humour is one way of doing it. Exactly. I mean, humour is one. If I've never been bored by something I've found funny, it's a sort of
it doesn't match.
It doesn't
right?
match.
Yeah.
It doesn't compute. You can't find something funny and boring. So, I mean, humour, and to me personally, humour is quite important. And it's as I say, when I came to Brussels many years ago and began writing the book that ended up as London in the South East. Obviously, I'd had in my mind, ever since I'd kind of got sick of doing that job, the idea of writing about it. The key to making it actually happen successfully was treating it humorously. As long as I was trying to treat it seriously, it didn't work. But as soon as I started to find it funny, rather than just horrible and bleak, it worked. And then yes, exactly. So humor is a very important way of being interesting, I guess, in those terms, yeah.
Next.
Do you know where you're going to when you start writing, or do you like surprising yourself?
I like knowing roughly where I'm headed, yes. That's my personal way of working.
But does it happen that you get surprised?
In details, but very rarely. I mean, I like to know the end of the story before I write the beginning.
Sounds plausible.
I mean, is that weird? I don't know.
No.
I like to know the whole story. I mean, I don't. In a way, I don't see how you can And I keep banging on about this game thing because it was we're supposed to be kind of talking about that. But in a way, that's the game is also to do with. It's more difficult to play that kind of game if you don't know where you're going.
But it's funny that the essays that you were commissioned to write an essay about having the reader in mind, yes or no, and that you actually also focus on the writer. Well, to me, it sounds like you're like on the writing process. I don't know whether you. But that's
precisely But that's precisely because my point is that that they're connected. You can't separate them. You can't say that the reader's here having this experience, the writer's here having this experience. They're having the same experience, just from different sides. I mean, it's in a way that's my fundamental point.
Out as being a reader first before you.
Well, exactly.
Become a writer.
That's a striking thing to think. Obviously, all writers begin as readers, and I assume that all writers become writers because they love reading. I don't know any writer who hates books but decided to become a writer. I mean, why would you do that? So, and most that love of reading usually starts in childhood.
Yeah.
I mean, not always, but very often. I mean, usually, I'd say. And so these experiences of childhood reading. I mean, when I think about reading as a child, it's a really pure and beautiful kind of experience. It's before you bring all of the other stuff that we bring to it as kind of serious readers of serious literature. We arrive with all this kind of clobber and infrastructure about, and especially if we've had the misfortune of studying it at university, themes and essays and, character development and blah, blah, blah. And you don't have that as a 8 or 10-year-old when you're reading.
The joy of just
you're just reading because you want
it.
to, because you like it, because it's entertaining you, because it's holding you, because it's interesting you. And that's really getting back to that kind of. I mean, of course, you can never get back to that. In a way, you don't want to get back to that because, you've moved on, your perspective has changed, and the things I was just belittling do enrich the experience as well. But that, I see that as the essence of it, though, still, always.
I hate to be a conventionalist or a Luddite, but there was something in what you said about your only rule for literature to be interesting that comes up a bit short for me, and I think I guess it's because my knee-jerk reaction is this not just an assumption that there's sort of a death of literature happening, and that we're competing with the Instagram story, so to speak, and I guess my question is it not just about a bag of tricks somewhere? And I fully agree with you that it needs to be interesting, but there's a layer that literature has on top of it that other things that are interesting don't necessarily have.
No, absolutely. I mean, my perspective is, that thing about competing with Instagram, and I hadn't even thought of that. That was very much not where I was coming from. I mean, I actually don't feel that literature's under threat. I'm an optimist. I genuinely am. So this isn't some kind of dumbing down rearguard action competing with Facebook thing. That's really not where I'm coming from. And there is the bag of tricks, and I believe strongly in the bag of tricks, and in it, but of course I also know what you mean when you say that literature offers unique pleasures. But I think that, you see, I don't know, I can't, those pleasures are all related, I believe, to the, it does sound reductive, but they are all related to just, say it again, being interesting. Being interesting is the first thing you have to achieve. There's other stuff that you can then achieve if you like. Or there are spectacularly great ways of being interesting. There are ways of being interesting that are more interesting than watching golf, which many people find interesting.
Do you find it difficult to talk about your work actually? I mean, what do you find it difficult to write the essay?
Once I'd got into the sort of swing of it, no. I mean, no. I mean, clearly, I mean, I was, you know, the essay isn't, you know, it's slightly nuance free. Of course, it's a short essay that, you know. So obviously, there's more to be said on the subject. But I mean, I do think the fundamental point. I mean, are you saying, for instance, that could something be not interesting and still good somehow? I mean, or what's the? Maybe try and identify exactly what the. Because I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. It's not like I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, I guess it's just. I mean, when I was younger and I read C.S. Lewis for the first time, it was an interesting story. And then when we studied it in school, or I read something about it, and it was all about religion and you know, there were certain archetypes and themes that were going on that I completely missed. I guess that's what made it literature. The fact that it stumped me, and so on. It can be interesting on several levels. It can be interesting on a blatantly pulp fiction level, as you referenced Agatha Christie, and then it can be interesting on a wholly different level, which I believe we're sort of starting to lose a little bit in our culture, in the sense that the top layer is coming off because we're maybe dealing less with nuance, or we're putting less layers on the story because it's a lot harder to sell fiction. It's a lot harder to get a readership. There's a lot more competition. That's what I meant by the Instagram story.
No, that's absolutely true.
And so in a way, I just wonder if literature is not losing its prestige in a way. And of course it can't be stuffy, and of course it can't just be all Nobel Prize in Literature sort of awards and prize awards, which is another separate political issue. But do you know what I mean? I do. I mean, and it is losing. I mean, it's losing. It has lost its cultural centrality. But in a way, that might be a good thing for it.
But as you said, you're an optimist. So
I'm an optimist, and that, you know, I mean, I was, you know, when I came up with that line about cultural form can survive too much prestige, I was kind of thought, oh, that sounds good. But it doesn't sound boring. It's true, yeah. I think. You know, I mean, once things become too rarefied, once they become too prestigious, then they kind of get a free pass sometimes, and they are kind of allowed to be boring. And then once that becomes a habit, then it starts to get dangerous, you know.
There's a few more other questions we'd like to hear. Thank you.
I thought one of the ways you made All That Man Is interesting was that you managed to stay away from cliches. And I thought what was most striking about all the characters in every chapter was that they weren't, we know these people so well, and yet they felt like rounded individuals. And sort of why that struck me most is because I'm a journalist, and I read the chapter on Your Journalist, I think it was the Danish one, and I thought that was the best portrayal of a journalist I'd ever seen, because it was kind of sympathetic, but you don't usually see a sympathetic journalist. So I just wondered, as you were writing them, was that a deliberate attempt to think, actually, it would be very easy for these characters to be cliches? Yeah, and actually, this is where it really does come also to what I was saying about the writer having to use their own sense of what's interesting to guide them in trying to find what they think will interest a reader. Because obviously, one of the things that is boring is cliches. Cliches are boring. That's why the techniques become cliched. You know, I mean, certain ways of writing book as a whole can become a cliche, whereas it wasn't when it was first done and was fresh and interesting. So yeah, I mean, cliche is the great. I think Martin Amis wrote a book collected his sort of essays on the subject under the title "The War Against Cliche," which is a good title. I haven't read the book, but because yes, it is. It's a kind of continual attempt to refresh and renew. So yeah, I mean, of course, with each of the characters, I was aware of the need to be careful not to lapse into cliche and not to, and in the case that you mentioned, it was exactly that. I thought one way of making this interesting in the sense of not cliched and making it something
which will slightly play with the reader's expectations and perhaps sort of slightly wrong foot the reader in terms of what they're expecting, would be to portray this character quite sympathetically, even though he's obviously in many ways not very sympathetic. And to sort of set out, to create a kind of tension then between that, and it sort of, I mean, that was part of what was going on in that particular story. So yeah, the avoidance of cliche, the attempt always to be fresh, to do something surprising. I mean, the whole idea of originality is not, in my view, an end in itself. It's a means to the end of being interesting.
So that's where the answer to the questions always ends. Another question in the back?
Thank you, David, for your essay. In the last part, you talked about autofiction, which is, I guess, the label that's being used for quite a fashionable form today, from the one you mentioned, Edouard Louis, and probably also Knausgaard and Rachel Cusk and so many more. Am I correct in thinking that, in your view, the label itself, autofiction, is a kind of paradox, because it is just fiction, it participates in the game of fiction.
Yeah,
but
I mean, that's, I mean...
The reason why it seems so successful is probably because readers see it as not just one of the genres within fiction.
No, absolutely. I mean, of course. I mean, but what I'm saying is, I think, you know, I admire all of the writers, the three writers that you mentioned. I think they're great. So I mean, I'm in no sense down on it or attacking it. But I am saying that if it calls itself fiction, then whether it's literally true or not becomes irrelevant. But if people believe it might be true, that does make them more interested. Absolutely. So it's a way, it can be seen as a way, as a new way of, it's not that new, of course, but it's a technique. It can be seen as a kind of technique. I would rather see it as a kind of technique than as anything else, really. I mean, it's a very successful technique. But I mean, what do you? I mean, does it matter if the content of a novel like that is literally true or not?
No, I don't think so. And
No,
I don't
exactly.
think what these writers present isn't literally true, or
we don't know. I mean, the fact is we simply don't know.
Because you also talked about reading someone's diary, but and you called it someone's unmediated thought.
Well, diary
it wouldn't be unmediated thought.
Well, no, I mean, exactly. A diary, I mean, with the diary, I was trying to, in a way, autofiction replicates some of the pleasure of secretly reading someone's diary. But, of course, autofiction is intended for publication.
Yeah, it's meant to be
They wrote it to be read. So pretending that they wrote it not to be read as a way of making it more, you know, that's what they're doing. They're kind of, and that's fine because it works.
In that sense, it's probably closer to the Instagram story, also kind of autofiction.
I don't, possibly.
Published.
As long as it's interesting, I'll just finish the line. Anyone else? Then I'll just ask you another question. Oh yeah, Sien.
Hi. The topic of the evening is the relationship or the perceived relationship between author and the reader. And I thought it was very interesting when Nikki asked you somewhere halfway the interview whether you wrote it for someone specific, and then you said like, no, I didn't have any reader in mind, which I think is interesting if you compare it to the topic of the essay, which I think, but that's an interpretation, that there's a huge difference in perception for the author to see the reader as an individual, like all of us having a book, as opposed to the reader as this amorphous, thousand-faced audience of people that have read books ever since the beginning of the art of the novel. And I was wondering, like, do you want to comment on this perception?
on the way that
like the difference between
all
seeing
readers
a
are
reader
individuals,
as an
but when you're
individual.
writing a book,
Yeah.
you can't write for any specific individual. Or
Yeah, maybe. I thought it was a very huge difference, an interesting difference between a perception as an author to an individual reader, which you do not take into account when writing. But if you write and you think about it like more technically or in the history of the novel with different literary techniques that could be used, then you see the reader as this huge amorphous audience.
yeah, I mean, as I say, when I write, I have a reader very much in mind. I mean, I feel that the presence of a reader, a person with whom I'm engaged in this game, this to and fro, this continuous attempt to play with their expectations somehow. But it isn't, it's of course not a specific, it's no, I mean, it couldn't be any, or the closest it becomes to being a specific person is it's me, you know, I mean, it's like, it's sort of, you're playing a game, you know, it's...
With yourself.
Because there's no other, really, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that was probably even true of Agatha Christie. I think that's always true. All writers, even, you know, who, except the most very cynical, perhaps, really they have to use themselves as their kind of specimen reader, because what else can you do? But then, yes, I mean, then it is, yeah, so then when the book goes into the world, it's of course then read not by some abstraction, but by actual individuals, yeah.
Go ahead. The mic's just behind you.
Oh, I have many questions. Oh, no.
The short one.
Yes. POV and voice. Does the voice ever become too loud to hear the reader? And do you have a relationship between muse and reader?
Do I have a muse?
That was the short version.
Not really. Not really, no. I wish I did, but but the POV, that's it, yes, because of course you sometimes, with the voice or the POV, you sometimes get into a continuous flow. Of course, it's not like you're sitting there choosing each word or sentence to kind of seeing how you maneuver the reader kind of second by second. I mean, it doesn't really work like that, of course. So yes, you get into, it's more like sort of grand strategy in the sense that you have I'm speaking personally, of course, but you have a sort of big idea, a large idea of what you're trying to do in terms of with this story, with this book, with this chapter, with this section. And you have a rough idea of how you're going to do it. But then once you're actually plunged into the real time of writing it, then it's a much more spontaneous thing, is what I'm saying, I guess, yeah. I mean, I don't want to make it sound too much like it's all cold calculation, because it's not, practice, it's not like that at all.
So maybe the two of you can talk a bit afterwards. There's a lot of stuff to talk about still, I have the impression. David, just short before I give you to the readers, like you can really engage with them personally. How does this, how do you feel when you encounter your readers? I mean, when you're signing your books, when you're giving autographs, I mean, the little conversations you might have. Is there something that sticks with you?
Sometimes. I mean, what can I say? I mean, yeah. I mean, sometimes and sometimes not. I mean,
but is it valuable for you? That's the question.
It's a highly stimulating experience.
Thank
absolutely.
you very much. That's what we all wanted to hear. Thank you very much, David Szalay, for being with us, for writing the essay.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Well, we'll talk.